The evening sky of the kingdom turned gold as the sun began to sink. In the tall palace of Avalora, Princess Alara walked along the balcony. Her silver dress moved softly in the wind, and her long hair shone like threads of light. People in the kingdom spoke often about her beauty, but those who knew her best admired her for her kind heart and brave spirit. She was not only a princess, but also a girl who cared deeply for justice and truth. Far from her side in the palace garden, a young man named Ethan walked slowly among the trees. He was not from the kingdom. He had come from a faraway land, brought by chance into this world so strange and yet so bright. Ethan was simple in his ways, but he had a strong mind and a steady heart. Though he did not belong to this place, something in him had already made him part of it. Each day he tried to understand the life around him, and each day he grew closer to Alara. The first time Alara met Ethan was by the fountain in the palace garden. He looked lost, standing by the water, not knowing where to go. She had walked up to him without fear, asking his name and why he looked so troubled. When he raised his eyes to her, she felt a spark of something new. It was not the kind of feeling that fades quickly. It stayed with her, growing quietly like a secret flame. Ethan, too, felt something he could not explain. He had met many people in his life, but none like Alara. She carried herself with grace, yet her smile was warm and human. She spoke to him not as a princess to a stranger, but as a friend to someone who needed comfort. In that first moment, Ethan's heart told him that this girl would change everything. Days passed and the bond between them grew. Alara often found reasons to meet him in the gardens, the library, or even by the wide steps of the hall. They spoke about many things, from the way the sun lit the hills to the questions of life and hope. Ethan shared stories of his world, and Alara listened with eyes full of wonder. In return, she showed him her world, teaching him the songs, the customs, and the secrets of her people. Together they built a small world of their own within the walls of the palace, but not everyone was happy with their closeness. Servants whispered in corners, and noblemen frowned in silence. To them, Ethan was only an outsider, someone who did not belong to the royal family's circle. The queen, Alara's mother, watched carefully from her throne. She saw how her daughter's sighs followed Ethan, and how her voice softened when she spoke of him. In her heart, she feared that this bond would lead to change she was not ready to face. Still, Alara did not care for the whispers or the looks of others. She believed in her heart that Ethan was not a mistake but a gift. She saw in him not weakness but strength, not strangeness but truth. She knew that her world could be brighter with him in it. Each time they walked together under the fading light, she felt her heart grow sure of what she wanted. Ethan, though aware of the whispers, stayed close to Alara. He knew he was not born of her world, and he feared the queen's sharp eyes, but he also knew that his bond with Alara was worth every risk. He did not seek the throne, nor did he crave power. What he wanted was simple: to be near her, to share her laughter, and to stand by her side. On one quiet evening, as the stars began to appear, Ethan looked at Alara and said in a soft voice that he would never leave her. She smiled, touched by his words, and told him that she would never let anyone take him away. The wind carried their promise into the night, and the stars seemed to shine brighter, as if the heavens themselves had listened. In that moment, both of them knew that their story was only beginning. The world around them might not understand, but the bond they shared was strong. And though shadows of doubt and fear gathered at the edges of the palace walls, their hearts carried a light that no darkness could put out. The days in the palace moved like a river, steady and full of hidden turns. Ethan grew more familiar with the life of the kingdom, though many people still looked at him as if he did not belong. Walked the long halls with quiet steps, learning what he could, but he always felt the weight of watchful eyes. The nobles in their fine clothes whispered among themselves, and their voices carried sharp edges. Some said he was dangerous, others said he was weak, but few believed he had a true place in their world. Alara did not let the talk disturb her. She often walked beside him, holding her head high, her calm smile silencing those who would dare to question her choice. To her, Ethan was more than a visitor. He was the man who listened when she spoke, who looked at her not as a princess, but as a girl with dreams and fears. That simple truth meant more to her than the approval of courtiers or the cold nod of her mother. The queen, however, was not blind. She watched her daughter carefully, her sharp eyes seeing every glance, every smile, and every quiet word shared between the two. The queen loved Elara dearly. God, she feared the bond growing between her and Ethan. To the queen he was an unknown, a stranger from far away, with no title, no power, and no roots in the land. She feared what would happen if her daughter's heart overruled her duty to the throne. One afternoon, Ethan was called to speak with the queen in her private chamber. The room was filled with golden light and tall windows open to the wide sky. The queen sat on her seat of silver wood, her face calm, but her voice firm. She asked Ethan about his past, his family, and his hopes. Ethan spoke honestly, telling her he had no desire for power, only to live with honesty and peace. He said he wanted nothing more than to stand beside Elara, not as a ruler, but as a man who cared for her. The queen listened without speaking, her hands folded in front of her. When he finished, she looked at him for a long moment before saying that love was not enough to guide a kingdom. Her words carried weight, and Ethan felt them press upon his chest like a heavy stone. She told him that his bond with Elara could bring danger, that the court might turn against them, and that the kingdom might suffer if the people lost faith in their rulers. Ethan left the chamber with a heavy heart. He walked through the garden, his steps slow and his mind troubled. He wondered if the queen was right. Perhaps his presence truly was a risk to Elara and her people. He thought of leaving, of stepping away before harm could come, but the thought of parting from her cut deeper than any blade. That evening, Elara found him by the fountain where they had first met. She saw the shadow in his eyes and asked what troubled him. Ethan told her of the queen's words, of the warning that love might not be enough. Elara listened, her hands gently holding his. She told him not to doubt, that love was not a weakness, but a strength. She said that her heart had chosen, and nothing her mother or the nobles could say would change that. Her words brought light back into his eyes. He saw then that her courage was greater than the fear that tried to surround them. They sat together under the stars, speaking softly about the future. Elara dreamed of a time when they could stand as equals, not as princess and stranger, but as two souls bound by choice. Ethan promised that no matter the trial, he would remain by her side. The palace continued to stir with whispers, and the queen's concern only grew. She began to plan a test, a way to prove whether Ethan was worthy of her daughter. The court watched and waited, sensing that something was coming. Elara felt the weight of it too, but she stood firm, her trust in Ethan unshaken. Though the night seemed darker, their bond burned like a steady flame, a promise that no storm could easily put out. The court of Avalora gathered in the great hall one evening when the queen called for all nobles and leaders to attend. The wide room glittered with crystal lights, and the long banners of the kingdom hung high from the walls. At the center stood Ethan, his hands steady, but his heart heavy. He knew this was the moment the queen had prepared. The nobles whispered among themselves, their eyes filled with suspicion and curiosity. Some wanted him gone, others wanted to see what he could prove, but all of them waited to hear the queen's decision. Elara entered with calm steps, her gown flowing behind her. She walked toward Ethan and stood beside him, her presence clear for everyone to see. The queen looked at her daughter, then at the man who had captured her heart. Her voice rose, carrying across the hall. She spoke of duty, of tradition, and of the need to protect the future of the kingdom. She asked Ethan to step forward and prove his worth before the court. Silence filled the room, broken only by the faint crackle of torches. Ethan moved slowly to the center. He did not carry fine armor or shining jewels. He was simple in his clothes, but strong in his will. The queen asked him what he could give to Elara, to the kingdom, and to the people who doubted him. His answer was plain, but each word came from the heart. He said he could not give riches or power, but he could give loyalty, truth, and the strength of a man who would never turn away from those he loved. He said that his heart belonged to Elara, and with her by his side, he would face any storm. The hall stirred with murmurs. Some scoffed, saying his words were too soft, but others felt the honesty in his voice. The queen, however, was not yet moved. She demanded more. She wanted to see action, not only words. She told Ethan that he must endure a test of courage. The court waited, their eyes wide, eager for the trial to come. Ethan looked at Elara, and she gave him a small nod, her trust shining in her gaze. With that, he agreed to face whatever the queen placed before him. The trial was not of swords or battles, but of endurance. The queen commanded that Ethan be placed in the Hall of Echoes, a chamber filled with illusions that tested the mind and spirit. Many before had failed, broken by fears made real in the shadows of that place. The doors opened, and Ethan stepped inside alone, while the court held its breath. Inside the hall, the air grew heavy. Dark shapes rose from the corners, whispering doubts and fears. He saw visions of failure, of Alara turning away, of the queen banishing him forever. Each step felt harder than the last, but he remembered Alara's smile and her words by the fountain. He spoke to himself quietly, saying he would not give in. The shadows pressed closer, their voices louder, but his will held firm. With every fear he answered with hope. With every doubt he answered with truth. At last the visions faded, and the chamber grew still. When the doors opened, Ethan walked out, his steps tired but his eyes steady. The court watched in silence. The queen looked at him long and hard. But before she could speak, Alara moved forward. She took Ethan's hand and stood before everyone. Her voice rang clear, strong, and full of fire. She declared that Ethan was not a stranger, nor a mistake, but the man she had chosen as her future husband. Her words shocked the hall, and a wave of gasps filled the room. The queen's face grew stern, her silence heavy. The nobles turned their eyes toward her, waiting for her reply. Alara stood unshaken, her hand still holding Ethan's. She repeated her words, louder, this time so none could mistake her meaning. She said that no trial, no whisper, and no fear could change the truth of her heart. Ethan had proved his courage, and she would stand with him no matter the cost. The great hall seemed to hold its breath. The queen's decision would shape not only the fate of her daughter, but the future of the kingdom itself. The queen rose slowly from her seat. Her long gown touched the polished floor as the room grew quiet. Every noble, every guard, and every servant turned their eyes toward her. For a long moment, she did not speak, and the silence pressed heavy upon the hall. Alara stood beside Ethan, her hand still holding his, her eyes steady on her mother. She knew the words she had spoken could not be taken back. The court waited, caught between fear and wonder. The queen's voice at last broke the silence. She said her daughter had shamed tradition by speaking so boldly, and she warned that such choices could bring ruin to the kingdom. Her words were sharp, and the nobles nodded, their faces tense. Yet Alara did not flinch. She raised her chin and told her mother that love was not shame. She said that Ethan had faced the trial with courage, and that courage was worth more than titles or birth. Her voice carried across the chamber, firm and unshaken. The queen's eyes burned with anger, but also with sorrow. She gave a command, and the guards stepped forward. Their armor clinked as they closed around Ethan, ready to take him away. The court gasped, waiting to see if the princess would yield. But Alara moved before them, standing between the guards and the man she loved. Her voice rang out with a cry that echoed through the hall. "Don't harm him. That's my future husband you're messing with." The words struck the air like a blade of fire. The guards froze where they stood, unable to move against the heir to the throne. Murmurs filled the room, rising like a storm. The nobles looked at one another, shocked at the open defiance of the princess. Some saw danger, others saw hope, but none could deny the power of her words. Ethan looked at her with awe, his heart overwhelmed by the strength she had shown. The queen's face grew pale, her lips tight. She had not expected her daughter to speak so fiercely. She tried to command the guards again, but none dared move. The loyalty of the soldiers was torn between the queen and the princess. For the first time, power in the great hall wavered. The queen felt it, and so did the court. The balance of the kingdom seemed to shift in that single breath. Alara reached for Ethan's hand, pulling him close so that all could see their bond. She told the court that Ethan was not a threat, but a man of truth who had faced shadows and stood unbroken. She said that if the kingdom could not see his worth, then the kingdom was blind. Her words struck deep into the hearts of many who listened. Some lowered their heads in shame, while others whispered with new respect. The queen, though shaken, would not yield so easily. She told Alara that a ruler must put the people before her own heart, that love could not rule a kingdom. But Alara answered with calm strength. She said that without love, a ruler was empty, and without truth, a kingdom would fall. She said that Ethan brought both truth and love, and that the future could not be built without them. The tension in the hall grew unbearable. The nobles waited, breathless, for the queen's next command. Ethan held Ilar's hand tightly, his eyes fixed on hers. He knew that whatever happened next would decide not only his fate, but hers as well. Yet in her gaze, he saw no fear. He saw only the steady flame of a heart that had chosen. At last the queen lowered her eyes. She turned away from her daughter in the court, her voice heavy with weariness. She said that the matter was not ended, but neither could she punish her daughter before the eyes of the kingdom. She left the hall, her gown trailing behind her like a shadow. The court remained in stunned silence, unsure what the future would hold. Lara and Ethan stood together in the center of the great hall, their hands still joined. Though the queen's approval had not been won, they had faced her wrath and endured. The nobles whispered, but their voices carried a new tone. Some spoke of rebellion, others of change, but all knew that nothing in the kingdom would ever be the same again. The night after the storm in the great hall, the palace was filled with silence. The queen had locked herself away, and the nobles whispered behind closed doors. The people of the kingdom heard of the scene, and word spread quickly from the palace gates to the far hills. Some spoke of fear, saying the throne would fall into ruin. But others spoke of hope, saying the princess had shown a strength that could guide them into a brighter age. Alara and Ethan sat together in the garden where their story had begun. The fountain trickled softly, and the stars shone like silver lamps above them. Ethan held her hand, his face calm, but his heart restless. He asked if she feared what might come. She looked into his eyes and said that fear was natural, but it would not stop her. She told him that she had chosen him not only for love, but because she believed the kingdom needed a man like him. A man who stood on truth rather than pride. Ethan listened, humbled by her words. He never thought of himself as great, but she made him feel as if he carried more strength than he knew. He promised again that he would not leave her, no matter the trials ahead. Together they shared a quiet moment, knowing the battles of the heart were not yet over. The next day, the queen called her council. The nobles gathered again, waiting for her to speak. Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed the weight of her thoughts. She told them that Alara's bond with Ethan could not be ignored. She admitted that the man had passed the test of courage, but she questioned if courage alone could rule a land. The council argued long into the day. Some pressed that Ethan must be sent away, while others said to resist the princess was to invite rebellion. The debate tore through the chamber, leaving the queen in silence. At last, Alara entered the room with Ethan at her side. The council fell silent. She walked to the center and spoke with calm strength. She said the kingdom was built on tradition, but tradition without change would turn into chains. She said Ethan was not her weakness but her strength, for he gave her the courage to face shadows without fear. She asked them to judge not by his birth but by his heart and the way he had already proven himself. Ethan stepped forward and spoke as well. He told the council he did not want the throne for himself, said he only wished to serve the people by standing at Alara's side. His words were plain, but they carried honesty, and that honesty was more powerful than gold. The nobles listened, and many found themselves moved in spite of their doubts. The queen watched them both, her heart torn. She remembered her own youth when choices had been taken from her in the name of duty. She saw in her daughter the courage she herself had once dreamed of, but never dared to claim. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, she spoke without anger. She told Alara that love and duty often stood apart, but perhaps in her daughter they could walk together. She said the path would not be easy, but she would not stand in its way. Relief filled the chamber. Some nobles still frowned, but they did not dare to speak against the queen's words. Alara stepped closer to her mother, thanking her with a quiet voice. The queen touched her daughter's cheek, not with full joy, but with the first hint of acceptance. The council ended with no more arguments, and the kingdom felt the weight of change settle upon it. That evening, the palace filled with light. The people gathered outside the gates, singing songs and holding candles, for news had spread that the queen no longer stood against her daughter. Alara and Ethan walked to the balcony, hand in hand, and looked upon the sea of faces below. Cheers rose into the night, carrying with them hope and promise. Ethan looked at Alara, and she looked back, both knowing that their story had just begun. The kingdom would face trials again, but now it would face them with two hearts united. Love had not broken duty. Instead, it had given it new strength. In the quiet of the night, as the stars burned brighter than before, Alara and Ethan stood as symbols of a future shaped not by fear, but by faith and truth. And so the kingdom of Avalora entered a new dawn, with a princess and a man who chose each other above all else.